George was massively up for this. George felt he could get the job done. George would have been absolutely furious not to be given that chance. How was George at the end of that race, notwithstanding the fact that the car was broadly competitive during the weekend? Well, I'm sure none of you will be surprised to know that he was completely devastated. I think probably it's very easy for us to underestimate just how much these drivers put into their driving, how much it matters to them. I think we all know it's important, but the degree to which it dominates all their decisions is something that's easy for us to underestimate. And George was absolutely inconsolable in the immediate aftermath of the race. However, it's a testament to his character, to the strength of his character, that instead of crawling into a little hole and suffering in silence, notwithstanding the fact that he was that upset, he came out, he spoke to every single person on the team at the track, apologized to them in person for his mistake, and owned it properly. Lewis was ahead of Lando, so why was the call given for him to give the position back? Well, I guess, we have to maybe question the premise of that question. Was Lewis ahead of Lando? Was he ahead of Lando and able to sustain his position on the track? All these things are a matter of judgment. We felt he was ahead. We felt that he would have been able to sustain his position on the track. But it's not us that make the decision. It's the stewards that look at that. It's the stewards that rule on it. It's a difficult thing for them to do because it is a matter of judgment. And of course, we're hardly unbiased agents. But Lewis felt he had the corner, and we, watching it, felt the same. But that isn't what matters. What matters is the stewards felt that he had left the track and gained an advantage in doing so. Was there a plan to undercut the front runners earlier in the race? Well, in every single race we do, there is many, many plans. You don't have one plan only. You have a range of them, and that range of plans you have is there so that you can cover the range of possible things that might happen during the race itself. Now, at Singapore, very often what happens is the leaders will, or the lead car will go off and drive much slower than the car is capable of, and will control the race from the front in order to make it so that it turns into a one-stop. But that doesn't always happen. Sometimes safety cars intervene or other things happen that means the gaps open up, and then a two-stop can come into play. Singapore is always a race that has quite high tyre degradation, and if the cards fall in the right way, then a two-stop can become very competitive. And we were prepared to go either way, expecting a race where the pace would be controlled from the front, leading to a one-stop race, but being ready to go for a two-stop, being ready to undercut if that was what looked competitive, and to make use of the fact that we had two medium tyres at our disposal when other teams didn't. Sainz controlled the pace very skillfully from the front. Leclerc, having started the race on soft tyres, was his wingman backing him up, and that traditional two-stop race wasn't on the cards. Can I talk everyone through the strategy at the end of the race? And in particular, with the benefit of hindsight, might we have been better to have split the strategies? As the race unfolded and as it got towards the second half of the race and the gaps started to open out and we weren't so clustered up as we had been in the beginning part of the race, then there started to be a gap behind the lead cluster of cars in which, if you wanted to have an aggressive strategy, if there was a safety car or a virtual safety car, there was a gap into which you could stop without having to be inconvenienced by having other cars in between you. And as we noticed this gap start to open up, then we started to discuss, as we always would, well, what would happen if a safety car came out now? Or what would happen if it came out in 5 laps from now, let's say? We do that always on a running basis through the race. And the models were predicting that if we put on a fresh set of tyres, if there happened to be a safety car or a virtual safety car, then it would give us a fair chance of being able to overtake on genuine pace, because by that stage of the race, they would be on quite old, hard rubber. Now, a full safety car, that would be ace, because that would have put us on new rubber and right behind them. But we calculated, even in the case of a virtual safety car, where you come out on fresh rubber, but a few seconds behind, we calculated that we would catch up those seconds at somewhere around about 1.5 seconds a lap, and that we would have enough pace advantage when we got there to make the overtake stick, or we would at least have a good chance of it. And when you're making these sort of assessments, you're trying to work out what's the upside. Well, the upside would have been, in the best case, a 1-2 for our team, pretty good. And what's the potential downside if you couldn't make it stick? And we were pretty confident that we would be able to get a certain amount up the road, that we'd probably get past Leclerc. And if that were the case, the potential downside was a 2-point loss compared with doing nothing. So the trade of a potential upside of a 1-2, potential downside of a couple of championship points, that made it feel like a really good bet, a really good hand to play. So that's what we decided to do. We decided to play it for both cars, because both cars had that chance of getting right the way through our competitor teams and securing that 1-2 for Mercedes. Now, you could argue that George had more to lose because he was in P2, and Lewis further back, better to gamble. And I guess that's behind the question of should we have split the strategies. But I think that probably underestimates a key point. George was massively up for this. George felt he could get the job done. George would have been absolutely furious not to be given that chance. And from our point of view, in the calculating seats, it looked like there was a very good chance that he would be able to get the overtakes done on new rubber. So from our point of view, absolutely worth the gamble. The downside was very small. The upside was absolutely enormous. The fact that it didn't work out, well, you know, playing poker is very similar to playing race strategy. Sometimes the hand doesn't go your way, but you calculate what's your best odds and you play it accordingly. And so very proud of the team for doing that. Very proud that we had the courage to do it with both cars, and neither driver at the end had any doubts that that was the right call, and certainly none of us on the engineering and strategy side did either. What are the expectations for Japan? Singapore is not a run-of-the-mill track. We know from past experience that you can have a very, very dominant season and still trip up in Singapore. And for whatever reason, my guess is that Red Bull tripped up there and they'll be back on form when it comes to Suzuka. For our own part, it's a track we're looking forward to. It's a track that asks very different questions of a car than Singapore. It's a track with extremely fast corners, some slow stuff. It puts a stretch on both ends of the car's handling range. And it's also a track where you need quite a lot of front load out of the front wing, something which is not the case in Singapore. I think that we should do okay. I think that our car has been reasonably good at coping with the various challenges posed by quite a wide range of tracks now. And I'm looking forward for us getting there in a few days' time, unpacking everything and seeing how it looks on the Friday running. Why was no one from the team at the podium to celebrate with Lewis? Once again, I'm going to have to disagree a little with the premise of the question, because of course the team was there at the podium to celebrate with Lewis. As many of the team as it was practical to get to the podium were there, because we enjoy it. We love standing there and clapping and cheering for our driver. Necessarily, a certain amount of the team had to stay in the garage because we needed to receive George's car back from the marshals who were bringing it back into the pit lane. But the rest of the team were all down at the podium and cheering along with everyone else. But you know, the cameras don't show everything. And the big story there was, of course, the first win this year for a non-Red Bull team. And so showing all of the overjoyed Ferrari faces was very high up the list of things that made for good TV. And indeed, you know, the pleasure from the McLaren folk as well. So there was a very significant number of all teams down there at the podium ceremony. We were a big part of it, but not maybe where the camera alighted during the podium celebrations.